Hello and welcome to Face to Face. On today's show, we'll focus entirely on the peace plan presented by top U.S. officials ahead of the Munich Security Conference, bringing you a Central Eastern European perspective. My name is Kalczyńska and I'm joined by Michał Broniatowski, Editor-in-Chief TVP World. Michał, negotiations haven't even started, but Donald Trump's moves are already ringing bells across Europe. To be honest, Europe is in shock. Bilateral agreements between Putin and Donald Trump leave no space and no hope for strong security guarantees for Ukraine. And we know that what Vladimir Zelensky was expecting. On numerous occasions, he reiterated that any peacekeeping force without U.S. involvement would provide insufficient protection, let alone the membership in NATO. So perhaps we should flip the discussion and talk about Vladimir Putin's interests. So do you think that those pourparlers or the conversations being held between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are really benefiting Putin? Is he really achieving what he wanted?
I think the main achievement, because of course it's a big success for Putin, is the mere fact that he was dug up from the grave of international acceptance. The president of the biggest country in the world, strongest country in the world, spoke to him for 1 hour and a half. Apparently they agreed on something. Europe, the reaction of commentators in Europe was, I would say, expectable, because if America starts talking to Russia without any notification for Europe or for European countries, for European Union, and even for Ukraine, it's very bad. Well, perhaps it is bad and shows bad manners of Mr. Trump and new way of running international politics. But the question is, Putin will at all listen to the ideas of Mr. Trump? He could have, make a nice gesture of freeing improperly arrested American teacher, or being simply nice to Mr. Trump. But, if he agrees for what Trump said he achieved with Putin, it would mean that he gives up on two of the three key goals he had when entering Ukraine 3 years ago. He called it denazification, and it's simply, it's his propaganda language, but it means he wants to get rid of legitimate government in Kiev and to impose on them Russian-friendly
this is still achievable. Trump said that just after a peace deal is reached, Ukraine will have to hold elections.
Ukraine agreeing for such thing? No,
not
it was
at all.
not even mentioned by Trump, so it was not on the table or on the phone. Mm-hmm. And he also wanted 3 years ago to demilitarize Ukraine. Of course, if we have a ceasefire there, it will mean that Ukraine will be better armed very quickly and, in fact, capable of holding off any future Russian invasions. The only victory for him was to stop, to close the door to NATO for Ukraine. President Zelensky is now saying if there is no door open for Ukraine to enter NATO, he will be happy with NATO guarantees, mm-hmm. which means the breach of the peace agreement would mean involvement of NATO.
Yes, the breach of the peace deal, because any European troops engaged in Ukraine would enter Ukraine without NATO umbrella and without triggering, of course, the Article 5.
Well, no. Because Mr. Trump himself and also Hexet were mentioning that the Article 5 will not be valid for peacekeeping forces created mostly by NATO troops. Mm-hmm. If he's suspending Article 5 for other members of NATO, he's undermining the basis at which NATO was built from its inception. because this idea that any country attacked by even alone being attacked by an adversary will be immediately supported by the full NATO might. It seems like forgetting on the part of Mr. Trump about what is NATO, because this was an organization which was originally formed to repel Russian Empire, then called Soviet Union. Today it's called Russian Federation. This time, today, NATO is facing hot war with Russia. You know, it's arming another country, which is Ukraine, in NATO arms to face off the Russian invasion, hot invasion. And, you know, it's the only instance since the beginning of NATO that this war with Russia is so imminent. And at that point, the president of the USA says that Article 5 will not apply in this case. So it's another example of what NATO means for Mr. Trump.
The very existence of NATO is undermined and is called into question, right? Well, now, as a response to these talks, we have had the Russian drone attack on the Chernobyl nuclear plant, on its sarcophagus. So is this another proof for the Europeans that they have to rearm Ukraine as soon as possible with air defense systems?
Well, I would say it's quite an interesting follow-up to the discussions between the two presidents, Putin and Trump, a few days ago. And then he immediately makes a move which can have tragic consequences. It was a big blast in Chernobyl, but the hole in the sarcophagus is not very big, but still, you know, bombing the place of the largest nuclear catastrophe in mankind history, bombing a sarcophagus is, you know, putting at risk lives of hundreds of thousands of people, not to mention the fact that winds can be either northernly or easterly, and this fallout, nuclear fallout, would arrive both in Belarus and in Russia. So I'm not sure if it is a good idea on his part, but on the other hand, he's just showing who is in charge, who has this finger on
the button. Well, I just try to understand how this narrative could be twisted, because just as last week we've discussed the calls by Donald Trump to end this tragic war and to save the lives of those beautiful young men, and we were talking about the Ukrainian young men in the very first place. Here now we have an attack on a nuclear plant, and how about translating this into reality, how to somehow explain it to the Western public?
You know, it's behavior of the way of behaving of President Putin, who prefers to show force, as any aggressor would be. You know, he thinks that showing his force would help him at the future, if any, negotiating table. You know, talking about these negotiations, I would say Americans are behaving quite strangely, because they said, well, Hexet, the defense secretary, said that he wants to couple allied strengths, I'm quoting here, with a realistic assessment of the battlefield. And then immediately Americans are giving up on two key bargaining chips that the say Ukrainian side of the table would have, meaning that saying that the land is not an issue at the moment, which means, you know, a large part of Ukrainian territory, it's about 20% of their territory, would stay in Russian hands. You know, and also saying openly something which everybody knows, but at least doesn't have to be repeated by the American negotiators, that NATO is closed for Ukraine. So he cannot use this argument anymore at the table, and a useful argument. It's a very strange attitude, let's say.
Let alone that Putin doesn't really want this land, right? This is not something that he requires or demands. This is simply a way of showing his philosophy that the whole Ukraine should be subjugated to Russia. That's it. So this is just
I don't know if he
phase.
thinks this way. His aim is to, in my view, his aim is, this war is disturbing. We want to concentrate on China, on the threat from China. That's why we have to get rid as soon as possible of this nuisance, of which, of course, the main victim will be Ukraine, but also the other victim, perhaps in future, would be the rest of Europe. It's reminds us of the same Munich
exactly
of 1938.
Rings a bell.
Yes, when Allies decided to surrender to demands from Hitler, not only allowing him to prepare better for the war he was planning, but also forcing Czechoslovakia to stop defending itself. Exactly a year later, German troops were entering Poland. We could have had the same situation in Ukraine. If Ukraine did not decide to fight 3 years ago, we would have had not only tanks on our borders and borders of Baltic countries, but moving tanks on these borders, plus firing missiles. So we should be grateful to Ukraine that they did it and somehow didn't follow the history, like the history of 1938. But, if...
well, the Czechoslovakia's troops weren't capable simply of deterring Germany at that time.
The Ukrainians had an army. They could have
heroically for 3 years, right?
Yes, and then, if Europe decided to help Czechoslovakia in deterring then unprepared yet Nazi troops, German troops, nobody knows what would have happened later.
I remember one of the Czechoslovakian politicians at that time saying, I don't know what you agreed upon, but you will be next. He was referring to the powers
Prime Minister
gathered in Munich.
Churchill said, you had a choice between war and dishonor. And you chose the dishonor, but you will have the war. But as I said at the beginning, it's not clear if the main player of this game, Mr. Putin, is really prepared to sit down at the negotiating table at conditions which were outlined by both President Trump and his defense secretary.
Coming back to the logic of the main negotiators, U.S. negotiators, they tend to forget that China itself is not a direct threat to Europe as perceived by the United States. So we do not see this threat as imminent as the United States. So we basically deal with a different opponent, and we see our enemy somewhere else, definitely elsewhere than the US.
It's of course difficult to compare who is more in danger.
Well, the dragon bear, which is Russia and China combined, as it's sometimes referred to, is dangerous to everybody. This is an understatement, but...
yes, but, it's hard to imagine that China could one day attack the U.S. territory, while you can easily imagine Russian troops entering one of the NATO countries or European countries, which, in the first place, it's Baltic countries, Finland and Poland, for that matter.
In the meantime, we hear from the Danish intelligence that Russia is ramping up its military. Russia's invasion on Ukraine has sent its defense spending skyrocketing, and it's raising fears it will attack NATO next. So what is the European response?
Ask the people who are meeting in Munich, but I think this is this very moment when Europe has to decide and show its willingness to unite forces in order to...
well, we hear this from everybody, but is it even feasible? Can we act collectively in terms of
This is another
interests?
question, but politicians have to get their act together and forget for a moment about elections in 2 or 3 years' time.
Well, some will have it in a week.
Yes. Well, these elections, we are talking about German elections, are already more or less decided there will be change of ruling party in this country. But, it cannot be so that in so important issues, so central to our future and the future of our kids, that such issues should be decided by people who are, first of all, in the first place, concerned about problems of the internal politics, rather than looking at it from the perspective, from strategic perspective of the future of Europe. We cannot live with the constant threat that rockets from Kaliningrad region can suddenly hit us here in Warsaw or in Berlin, or see Russian tanks crossing the Poland's eastern border. We have to be able to show Russia that if you want peace, you have to be getting ready to it.
But so far we can only see a readiness paralysis on the part of European
Maybe not,
Union.
But we mentioned these elections in Germany. This may end with less opposition on the part of Germany, funding a defense effort from common debt of the European Union countries. At the moment, Germany is staunchly against it, but it may well happen that under new government they will agree for that, and we will have similar financing tool as European Union agreed to create to support countries after the COVID.
Michał, what about this reset that the Americans are proposing here in Europe towards Russia? So the G7 could soon evolve into G8. Are we just abandoning all the sanctions against Russian oligarchs? And what about it? Is it just business as usual with Russia again?
No, it's an example of a general change of all paradigm of American foreign policy, especially defense policy towards places like Europe. For Biden administration, investment in defense of Ukraine was a matter of ethics, values, principles. For Mr. Trump, nothing of that kind. He's presenting without any shame his transactionalist approach, and he's openly saying, and luckily Ukrainians are agreeing, that we give you a deal for $500 billion worth of your mineral resources, including lithium, and then we will help you militarily. This is a new approach.
By the way, this agreement hasn't been signed yet. But
well, it has been mentioned, and
I just hope it doesn't act retroactively. So this is like a reimbursement for the spending so far.
If Ukraine has something to pay for it, not only getting support, donations from the rest of the world, if they can show that they have hard currency in the form of rare earth metals, that is good. That will give more negotiating power to Ukraine, because this is, money talks. Europe will have to agree on such an approach like this, which is presented by Trump's administration, and live with it, react to it in a way that we also have money to defend ourselves.
Because we don't have that rich minerals, unfortunately.
Yes.
So let me just quote Pete Hegseth as a commentary to what you've just said, Michał. Values are important, but you can't shoot values. As much as we may not like the world we're living in, there's nothing like hard power. So we're just entered a new era with power as a main value.
At the moment, we didn't even, nobody has sat down to any discussions, to any negotiations. We are now in the process of preparation of all these things. I'd like to end with the quote from Garry Kasparov, a big chess player and also leading oppositionist to Putin's dictatorship. In fact, differing from other oppositionists because he's not sharing views of the most of liberal opposition, which doesn't want to relinquish Russian imperialism. Kasparov does, and he says, quote, Russia will be rewarded for its mass murder and seizure of territory by force, will continue to torture all kind of and kill in occupied Ukraine and prepare for another attack. The US will just be another tyrant that puts force at the expense of law and is eager to divide the world with China or Russia. Aggression and authoritarianism are rewarded. Democracy loses.
Very pessimistic view, but let's keep up hope. We need to. We owe it to the next generation. Thank you, Michał, for your valuable insights and for your time. And that's all in this episode of Face to Face, but please join us again on Monday. In the meantime, please stay tuned to TVP World for more news and commentary. Thank you for watching and see you soon.